Hello, folks, and welcome to another episode of the Dr. Mark Foster Show. Today, I will be continuing my discussion of the Bhakti Sufi movement and Sikhism, in particular, Surat Shabd Yoga, which I mentioned briefly in my last podcast. I will be addressing the subject in a rather critical way, meaning an analytical way, but also trying to point out some of my own personal experiences with it and why, based upon that, I would generally recommend against people practicing Surat Shabd Yoga. First, Surat Shabd Yoga was started in the mid-19th century by a Sikh banker named Shiv Dayal, sometimes called Shiv Dayal Singh, and he was influenced to a large degree by the Guru Granth Sahib, which is the holy book of Sikhism, which talks about something called the Nam. Nam is a cognate of the English language word name, and Nam does mean name. It is generally used to refer to the name of God, and it is understood by Shiv Dayal as a kind of hierarchy of sounds, which the meditator experiences through the practice of meditation. I'll explain to you briefly what that practice is. One plugs one's ears like this, and then one listens for various sounds that, according to the gurus or sants, holy men of Surat Shabd Yoga, come from the inner planes. They range from flute to a harp and all sorts of other kinds of sounds, which are explained in Surat Shabd Yoga literature. I personally was initiated into 3 branches of Surat Shabd Yoga. 2 of them come out of the Radhaswami Satsang Bayas tradition, and the 3rd comes out of the Surat Shabd Yoga Dialbag tradition. But the meditation is essentially the same. The mantras can vary. They're not the same from one sect to another. In most branches of Surat Shabd Yoga Bayas, not all but most, the mantras are recited inwardly. There are 5 mantras or 5 names which are recited inwardly, which are given to the practitioner at the time of meditation. One silently recites those words, not audibly, and one attempts to see various visions, supposedly visions of spiritual planes, and while plugging one's ears, one attempts to hear a variety of different sounds. So those are the 2 basic elements of Surat Shabd Yoga. One is a kind of alleged visionary experience, and the other is the experience of inner sounds. They are both distinct practices in Surat Shabd Yoga meditation. With 2 of the initiations, I learned both of those techniques. With the 3rd, I only learned 1 of them. But regardless, it doesn't really matter. It's the same basic technique with some slight variations from one to the other. One of the major problems, as I see it, with Surat Shabd Yoga is the fact that it is based on a kind of inner knowledge, or using the Greek word gnosis, which means knowledge, or inner knowledge, mystical knowledge. The Arabic word would be irfan, or marifat, which is kind of knowledge or mystical knowledge. And the basic idea is that, for example, when a guru or sant, a true one, which is what sant literally means, dies, he appoints a successor. With some exceptions, that appointment of a successor has not been done in the form of a will. It is supposedly done inwardly, but even that has not mattered. For example, perhaps the most well-known sant of Surat Shabd Yoga in the West is the late Kirpal Singh. When his guru died in Radhaswami Satsang Beas, his guru did appoint a successor in his will. Nevertheless, Kirpal Singh claimed that he had an inner vision of his master, in which his master said, "No, you should be the true successor to your guru. I am appointing you as my successor." That led to a dispute between him and Charan Singh, who was the appointed successor of Radhaswami Satsang Beas, at least on paper. Charan Singh won a series of lawsuits. Kirpal Singh lost, and as a result, Kirpal Singh started his own organization, Rohani Satsang. Interestingly, when Kirpal Singh died, numerous people, 5 that I know of, but possibly even more than 5 people, claimed to be the successor to Kirpal Singh. Even during Kirpal Singh's lifetime, various individuals whom he had initiated, notably a guy named John Roger and a guy named Paul Twitchell, claimed to be the true master, according in the language of Paul Twitchell, the Ek Master. Since his faith or his tradition, he called it Ekankar, which is basically kind of a watered-down version of Surat Shabd Yoga. Most branches of Surat Shabd Yoga require vegetarianism. Ekankar does not. Also, the school started by John Roger does not require vegetarianism either. But again, it's the same basic method of meditation. The controversial aspect of Ekankar was that for many years, Paul Twitchell claimed that he was the inheritor of a secret tradition, and he denied having any relationship to Rohani Satsang. Eventually, a photograph surfaced which showed him with Kirpal Singh. As a result of that, a lot of members of Rohani Satsang left Rohani Satsang, some in anger. Others stayed, but a lot of them left. When Kirpal Singh died, he appointed a successor. Eventually, for some reason, that successor was kicked out of Ekankar and was replaced by another one who remains the head of Ekankar, a guy named Darwin Gross. So it's a kind of Surat Shabd Yoga has a long, kind of twisted, perhaps even tortured history of people claiming to be gurus, of people being kicked out, of open disputes or verbal fights breaking out between one person who claims to be a successor and another one. Very commonly, these gurus or sants or masters will say that they are the only true master and the others are imposters. There are some who do not have that kind of harsh view, but the harsh view is rather common, and I would say even predominant in Surat Shabd yoga. Now here is the personal aspect that I wanted to mention. I had a rather unusual experience of my own with Surat Shabd yoga. Very unusual. And it was related to the meditation on sounds, when one plugs one's ears and listens for the sounds coming from supposedly the inner planes. In my view, those sounds are entirely imaginary. When one meditates, one becomes in a very suggestible state. Perhaps it's a kind of self-hypnosis of some sort, and one is kind of looking for those sounds. I know that I was, in retrospect. And those sounds began to stay with me. And so even when I was not practicing the meditation, I began hearing those sounds, and I became highly suggestible to sounds in general. Now, I do have a history of OCD. As an autistic, I also have OCD, which is a common comorbidity or shared condition with autism. When I was younger, it was much worse than it is now, but it surfaced again when I was practicing the sound meditation aspect of Surat Shabd yoga. It took me 10 years until I finally got rid of this horrendous buzzing, which was almost constantly inside my head. Even now, I will occasionally hear those sounds, or some kinds of sounds, but they don't last that long, and they are manageable. They're not as bad as they were at one time. So, generally speaking, I personally would not recommend that anyone study Surat Shabd yoga. This is not meant as a slight against Surat Shabd yoga. I personally have nothing against it. I have had some people over the years who I've considered good friends who practice it and do not seem to have these negative experiences. So perhaps my experiences are particular to me, I don't know. But all I can do is rely upon what I have experienced, which would lead me not to recommend it, and also the fact that I simply don't see it as a legitimate meditation. I don't think that there are these inner sounds that one can hear. I don't think that the visions that one sees supposedly are legitimate visions. I think that they too are results of inner suggestibility. That concludes this broadcast of the Dr. Mark Foster Show. Have a good one.